Every December, across almost every corner of the planet, the same man appears. A red coat, a thick white beard, black leather boots, a booming laugh. He lives at the North Pole. He flies through the night with 8 reindeer. And somehow, every child knows exactly what he looks like. But here's the strange part. No government ever decided his appearance. No church ever declared it. No history book ever officially described him. Yet somehow, billions of people imagine the exact same face. How? Most people think they already know the answer. Coca-Cola invented Santa Claus. It's one of the most repeated stories in modern history. A soft drink company created the most famous man on earth. It sounds almost impossible, but then again, so does Christmas. The problem is, that story isn't true. Coca-Cola didn't invent Santa Claus. In fact, by the time Coca-Cola painted its first Santa, the legend had already survived for more than 1,600 years. So if Coca-Cola didn't create him, who did? Was it a saint, a poet, an artist, or was Santa never one person at all, but a story rewritten over centuries by countless people who never realized they were shaping history? Because the Santa we know today isn't just a product of Christmas, he's the product of empires, religion, war, immigration, poetry, advertising, and one of the most successful marketing campaigns the world has ever seen. This isn't the story of how Coca-Cola invented Santa Claus, it's the story of how an ancient bishop slowly transformed into a global icon, and how one company managed to convince billions of people that their version was the real one. To uncover the truth, we have to leave behind the shopping malls, the Christmas lights, and the snow-covered North Pole. Instead, our journey begins nearly 17 centuries ago, under the scorching sun of the Roman Empire. Because long before there was Santa Claus, there was simply a man named Nicholas. And his story changes everything. Forget everything you picture when you hear the name Santa Claus. Forget the snow. Forget the reindeer. Forget the red suit, because the story doesn't begin in the frozen Arctic. It begins nearly 1,700 years ago, in a place where Christmas looked nothing like it does today, the Roman Empire. At the beginning of the 4th century, Rome ruled vast stretches of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Its roads connected continents. Its armies enforced order, and its emperors demanded loyalty above everything else. Deep within the eastern edge of the empire lay a prosperous port city called Myra, in what is now modern-day Turkey. It was here that a boy named Nicholas was born. Unlike the legend that would come centuries later, Nicholas wasn't magical. He couldn't fly, he didn't command elves, and there was certainly no workshop hidden at the North Pole. He was simply a man. But sometimes, ordinary people leave behind extraordinary stories. According to early Christian tradition, Nicholas was born into a wealthy family. While many inherited their parents' fortunes and lived comfortably, Nicholas made a very different choice. He gave almost everything away, quietly, anonymously, without expecting recognition. And it was one particular act of generosity that would change history forever. The story tells of a father with 3 daughters. The family had become desperately poor, so poor in fact that the daughters faced a bleak future. Without money for a dowry, their chances of marriage disappeared, leaving them vulnerable to exploitation and poverty. Nicholas heard about their situation, but instead of announcing himself as a hero, he waited. Late one night, while the family slept, Nicholas approached the house carrying a small bag of gold. Rather than knocking on the door or asking for thanks, he tossed the bag through a window. According to some versions of the story, down the chimney, where it landed inside a stocking left to dry beside the fire. The next morning, the family awoke to a miracle. Their eldest daughter now had a future. Then, a second night, another bag of gold, another daughter saved. By the 3rd visit, the father refused to let the mysterious benefactor disappear again. He stayed awake, determined to discover the stranger who had changed his family's life. When Nicholas returned, the father rushed outside and fell to his knees. But Nicholas asked him for only one thing: tell no one. That single request would become one of the defining traits of his legend. giving, not for praise, not for fame, but because it was the right thing to do. Over the years, stories like these spread across the Roman world. Some claimed Nicholas rescued sailors from deadly storms. Others believed he saved innocent men from execution. Many of the tales grew larger with each retelling, blending history with faith until it became almost impossible to separate the man from the myth. When Nicholas died, sometime around 343 AD, his life should have quietly faded into history. Instead, it became something far more powerful, a legend, one that would outlive empires, cross continents, and survive for nearly 2,000 years. But as his story traveled farther from Myra, people began changing it. Each generation added something new. Each country imagined a different Nicholas, until eventually, the world wasn't telling one story anymore. It was telling hundreds. When Nicholas died, his story should have ended. Instead, it began a journey across an entire continent. As Christianity spread throughout Europe, so did the legend of the generous bishop from Myra. Churches were built in his name. Sailors prayed to him before dangerous voyages. Merchants saw him as their protector. Children waited eagerly for the day dedicated to Saint Nicholas. But stories have a habit of changing every time they are retold. The farther Nicholas traveled from his home in Myra, the less he resembled the man he once was. Every country added something new. Every culture reshaped him, until one saint became hundreds of different legends. In England, he slowly merged with an older figure known as Father Christmas. Unlike Saint Nicholas, Father Christmas wasn't originally a gift giver. He represented something much broader: feasting, hospitality, good cheer, the joy of winter celebrations. He often wore long green robes decorated with holly and ivy. He looked less like the Santa we know today, and more like the spirit of Christmas itself. Across the North Sea, the Dutch held tightly to Santa Claus. Every December, children would leave their shoes by the fireplace, hoping to wake up to sweets and small presents. But Santa Claus didn't arrive in a flying sleigh. According to Dutch tradition, he traveled by ship from Spain. He rode a white horse across rooftops, wearing the robes and bishop's mitre that reflected St. Nicholas's religious origins. In Germany and Austria, the traditions became even stranger. St. Nicholas wasn't always alone. He was often accompanied by a terrifying companion known as Krampus, while Nicholas rewarded well-behaved children with gifts. Krampus punished those who had misbehaved. With horns, claws, and a frightening appearance, he was less a Christmas helper and more a nightmare brought to life. Elsewhere in Europe, there were even more versions. Some traveled on donkeys. Some arrived weeks before Christmas. Some carried toys. Others carried switches for naughty children. The details changed from village to village, sometimes from one town to the next. There was no official Santa, no universal outfit, no North Pole, no flying reindeer, no elves making toys. Only dozens of different traditions, all claiming to honor the same man. And that's what makes this story so remarkable. For nearly 1,500 years, the world couldn't agree on who Santa Claus actually was. The legend had fractured into countless versions, each shaped by local customs, local beliefs, and local imagination. It seemed impossible that all of these stories could ever become one. But across the Atlantic, a young nation was growing, a nation built from immigrants, bringing their traditions with them. And among those traditions was a Dutch bishop named Sinterklaas. America was about to become the place where every version of Santa would finally collide. By the beginning of the 19th century, St. Nicholas had been traveling across Europe for nearly 1,500 years, but there was one problem. No one could agree on who he actually was. To the Dutch, he was Sinterklaas. To the English, he was Father Christmas. In Germany, he took on another form. Across Scandinavia, he blended with ancient winter folklore. Every country claimed to know him. Yet every country imagined him differently. Then, an ocean changed everything. In the 1600s, Dutch settlers crossed the Atlantic and founded a colony they called New Amsterdam. It would later become New York City, and with them, they carried more than furniture, food, and language. They carried Santa Claus. Generation after generation, the Dutch celebrated the feast of St. Nicholas every December. Children would leave out shoes, hoping to wake up and find them filled with sweets and small gifts. But America was different. It was a melting pot, cultures mixed, languages blended, traditions collided, and somewhere in that cultural crossroads, Santa Claus slowly became Santa Claus. The name changed first. The legend would soon follow. Then, in 1823, an anonymous poem appeared in a New York newspaper. Its title was simple: A Visit from St. Nicholas. Today, most people know it by its opening line: "'Twas the night before Christmas." No one could have predicted what those words were about to do. For the first time, Santa wasn't just a generous saint. He became a magical visitor. The poem described a cheerful old man arriving silently on Christmas Eve. Not on foot, but in a tiny sleigh, pulled through the night sky by 8 flying reindeer. He slipped down chimneys, delivered presents while families slept, and disappeared before sunrise. Almost overnight, Christmas itself began to change. The poem spread across America with astonishing speed. Parents read it to their children. Newspapers reprinted it. Schools embraced it. Within a few decades, millions of people pictured Santa in almost exactly the same way. But there was still one problem. Nobody knew what he looked like. Every illustrator imagined him differently. Some painted him tall, others made him short, some dressed him in green, others preferred blue, brown, or even tan. The story finally had a hero, but the hero still had no face. Then, in the middle of one of America's darkest chapters, the Civil War, another man quietly stepped into history. His name was Thomas Nast, a political cartoonist working for Harper's Weekly. In 1863, while the nation was tearing itself apart, Nast published an illustration of Santa Claus visiting Union soldiers. It wasn't just another Christmas drawing, it was the beginning of something much bigger. Year after year, Nast kept drawing Santa, and with every new illustration, he added another piece to the legend: a large white beard, a round belly, a warm smile, the North Pole workshop, elves making toys, a list of naughty and nice children, details we now take for granted, didn't exist before Thomas Nast imagined them. By the end of the 19th century, the blueprint for modern Santa was almost complete. Almost. There was still one thing nobody could agree on: his clothes. Some artists painted them green, others brown, some bright red, others dark crimson. There was no official Santa, no single version the entire world recognized. The legend had finally found its face, but not its identity. And that uncertainty created an opportunity that one struggling company, desperate to survive the winter, was about to seize. Not with religion, not with tradition, but with advertising. The year was 1931. America was no longer celebrating prosperity, it was struggling to survive. The Great Depression had swept across the country like a storm. Banks collapsed, businesses disappeared, factories shut their doors, millions of people lost their jobs. Families who had once lived comfortably were now standing in bread lines, wondering where their next meal would come from. It was one of the darkest economic crises in modern history, and Coca-Cola had a problem of its own. People loved drinking Coca-Cola during the summer. It was cold, refreshing, the perfect drink for a hot afternoon. But every winter, sales plummeted. As temperatures dropped, so did profits. To most people, a bottle of Coca-Cola simply didn't feel like a winter drink. The company had spent years trying to change that perception. They ran advertisements encouraging people to drink Coke year-round, but nothing seemed to work. Then someone asked a simple question: what if, instead of changing the drink, they changed the feeling around it? Instead of convincing people that Coca-Cola belonged in winter, what if winter itself belonged to Coca-Cola? To make that happen, they needed someone the entire country already trusted, someone who represented warmth, family, joy, generosity, Christmas. There was only one choice, Santa Claus. But there was a problem. Santa still didn't have one universally accepted appearance. Over the decades, artists had portrayed him in dozens of different ways. Some made him thin, others gave him a stern, almost intimidating expression. Some dressed him in green, others in brown or deep crimson. Depending on the illustration, he looked more like a wandering bishop than the cheerful grandfather we know today. If Coca-Cola wanted people to associate Santa with their brand, they couldn't use just any Santa. They needed the Santa. So they turned to an American illustrator named Haden Sundblom. Sundblom wasn't asked to invent Santa Claus. He was asked to paint him. But the way he painted him would change history. Instead of creating a distant mythical figure, Sundblom imagined someone who felt real. Someone you could laugh with. Someone who looked like he genuinely enjoyed sneaking into homes on Christmas Eve. He gave Santa bright, friendly eyes, rosy cheeks from the winter cold, a full white beard, soft wrinkles around his smile, a sturdy frame that suggested years of enjoying milk and cookies. He wasn't mysterious, he wasn't intimidating, he looked human, warm, kind, like the grandfather everyone wished they had. His clothes were impossible to ignore. A vibrant red suit trimmed with bright white fur, black leather boots, a wide belt. Every detail was painted with incredible care. Interestingly, the color wasn't chosen simply because Coca-Cola's logo was red. Red had already appeared in earlier illustrations of Santa, but Sundblom refined it, brightened it, made it unmistakable. Then Coca-Cola did what no artist before him could. They didn't publish one painting, or 10. They published millions. Every Christmas, newspapers carried Sundblom's Santa, magazines printed him, store windows displayed him, billboards towered above city streets, calendars hung him in homes. For more than 3 decades, the same smiling Santa returned, year after year, never changing. Children grew up with him, parents grew up with him. Eventually, grandparents did too. Without ever announcing it, Coca-Cola accomplished something extraordinary. They didn't tell the world, "This is Santa." They simply showed the same Santa over and over and over again. Until one day, people stopped imagining any other version. Coca-Cola hadn't invented Santa Claus, but they had done something far more powerful. They had given billions of people the exact same face to remember, and in doing so, they proved one remarkable truth. Sometimes, the most powerful force in history isn't invention, it's repetition. Most advertisements are forgotten. You see them for a few seconds, and then they disappear. A billboard on the motorway, a commercial between television shows, a poster on the side of a bus. They sell a product, and then they're replaced by the next campaign. But Coca-Cola wasn't creating an advertisement. They were creating a tradition. Every Christmas, the same familiar face returned. The same warm smile, the same bright red suit, the same white beard. Year after year, without changing. Children saw him in shop windows. Parents saw him in magazines. Families saw him on calendars hanging in their kitchens. He wasn't interrupting Christmas. He was becoming part of it. And that's where psychology takes over. The human brain loves familiarity. The more often we see something, the more natural it begins to feel. Psychologists call this the mere exposure effect. Simply seeing the same image repeatedly makes us more likely to trust it, prefer it, and eventually accept it as normal. Coca-Cola understood this decades before most people had even heard the term. They didn't need to convince the world their Santa was the real Santa. They only needed to make sure he was the Santa people saw the most, and eventually, memory did the rest. Ask someone to picture Santa Claus. Most won't describe a 4th century bishop from the Roman Empire. They won't imagine a tall, thin saint dressed in church robes. They won't picture Father Christmas wearing green. Instead, they'll describe the exact version Haden Sundblom painted nearly a century ago. Not because they consciously memorized it, but because they grew up surrounded by it. Their memory quietly filled in the blanks. Over time, the advertisement stopped feeling like an advertisement, it felt like history. Then something even bigger happened. Hollywood arrived. As films became the world's most powerful form of entertainment, directors needed a Santa everyone would instantly recognize. They didn't search ancient manuscripts. They didn't consult historians. They simply chose a version audiences already knew, the smiling man in the red suit. From Miracle on 34th Street to the Santa Claus to Elf, the same image appeared again and again and again. Television followed. Greeting cards copied it. Toy manufacturers copied it. Shopping centers hired actors to dress like him. Department stores built entire Christmas displays around him. Soon, it no longer mattered where the image had come from. It had become universal. Children in New York, London, Tokyo, Sydney, and Sao Paulo could all draw almost exactly the same Santa, not because they shared the same history, but because they shared the same image. That's the extraordinary power of repetition. It doesn't just influence what we buy, it shapes what we remember, it shapes what we believe, and sometimes it quietly rewrites history itself, which is why, even today, millions of people confidently repeat the same story. Coca-Cola invented Santa Claus. Ironically, it's the one part they never did. But perhaps what Coca-Cola accomplished was even more remarkable, because they didn't invent a legend. They convinced the entire world to remember it the same way.